Welcome everyone. Welcome back to those that continue to come back in for these sessions. It's great to see the commitment. Today we are still on day 3 of our Thailand bike ride. So we are making our way from Prachuap Khiri Khan to Bang Krut. And Bang Krut is a beautiful, sleepy coastal town that does the best pizza and pasta on tour. So it's certainly a day that we all enjoy on the bike. It's also the shortest day, or one of the shortest days of the Thailand of the 8-day ride, and it's the last one before we go into the 100-kilometer days following that. So it's we usually finish around lunchtime and have the afternoon off by the pool, which is lovely. But I'm sure no pools today, given the nice winter temps. Except for maybe those in the Northern Hemisphere, Stu. But yeah, we'll be staying well away from pools. So today we're joined by Cameron Mostyn, and Cam's dad, Andy, and Gabe have been long-time supporters of Hands, and Cam has an incredible story that Pete is going to have a chat about this afternoon. But he has a huge passion for adventure, running marathons, climbing volcanoes, diving and trekking mountains all over the world. He is also active in the philanthropic space and works closely with numerous charities in his capacity as director of a private ancillary fund. In December 2019, Cameron and 3 mates attempted the Talisker Atlantic Challenge. This is one of the world's toughest races, with teams rowing 5,000 kilometres unaided across the Atlantic Ocean. Seriously, that is just phenomenal. So here to tell the story and to have a chat is Pete and Cam. Enjoy.
Thanks, CT. Thanks, Cam, for joining us today, and thanks for support that you've shown Hands through the family. You and your brother Tom and Dad visited. Geez, that must be what must that be? 12 years ago or so ago, Cam, that you first came to Bantham Nam Chai, was it?
Yeah, I think it was before the rides even started. So yeah, it's going back a while.
Yeah, cool. But we're not going to talk about that too much today because we've got.
Can we just?
Yeah, sure.
Jump in. Sorry, guys. We've had a few tech issues, so you won't be able to see Cam or Pete today, but they will be chatting the whole session. So, yeah, a few internet issues. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so you can trust that Cam and I both are cycling. We're not sitting back with a coffee, but and just on the footage, you can see, I just love what this ride throws up. Beautiful ride through the palm trees. Again, you know, quiet roads and in good condition, and typical day on the bike. Cam, let's get to it. 15th of January, 2020. It was a day that'll stay with you forever, yeah?
I actually really lost count of the days, but I'm assuming that that's the day that we finished the row.
That's it, mate. That's it.
Yeah, we didn't exactly have much going on with the calendars, and we were well and truly outside the routine of what day or even week it was by the end there. But it was an incredible experience to finish, and it just, you know, the sort of floodgates of emotion, having pent them up for sort of 35 days, and finally rowing into civilization and seeing loved ones was very special.
Yeah, I posted on the Ride to Provide Facebook page this morning some footage of you guys getting to the end, being embraced by family, and you know, something that can obviously only be understood by the 4 of you guys or your fellow competitors who have done something so remarkable. So 34 days, 10 hours. You started in the Canary Islands and finished in Antigua. 4 mates, you, Marty, Ryan, and Nick. It brought to an end an amazing journey. But you almost didn't get there, did you? It was the day of the race that there was a problem with something on the boat. Take me through what you were going through the day of when you were supposed to start and you find out that there's a technical issue with the boat.
Yeah, I mean, we'd sort of come to the better part of 2 years of preparation, and everything was leading up to that start date. And then we found out doing a pretty innocuous comms test about 48 hours before the start of the race that we didn't have one of the key components and that they wouldn't let us start without it. So we didn't have a piece of equipment that would identify us out in the ocean to other sort of seafaring vessels. And without that in place, it meant that, you know, if a big shipping tanker or a large cruise boat came across us in the night, a little rowing boat, they just absolutely steamed. But it was absolutely heartbreaking to find out so close to the start that we were in a position where they wouldn't let us go. Unfortunately, Dad, who's sort of the hero of this story, arrived on the dock by surprise from Western Australia and happened to be in a position where he could go out to the other islands and look around and go to different shops and try to source this piece of equipment for us. And then ultimately we found a guy in the pub who was a marine electrician who was able to install it. And we got the green light 16 hours before the start of the race, which meant that we could go.
When I was reading about that issue, Cam, and it said that one of the dads had sourced it, and why am I not surprised that it was your dad who flew in with a cape on his back just before you're about to set off and solves the problem. But let's go back to, you mentioned it was 2 years. So 4 mates, and you decide to make the commitment to do this. Was it something that making the commitment, was it a discussion over beers and you go, you know, let's do it? Was it then something that took a time to, were you all in that initial commitment? Did you have to build a team? Did you have to recruit? Did you have to interview? Or was it something that you know, at first discussion, you just went, yep, this has got our name over it, and you were rock solid from the beginning?
Well, I definitely start by we were anything but rock solid. It like all great things, like many great things, it did start with a few beers at the pub and then someone broaching a crazy idea. And when we all sort of initially heard it, we had different reactions in terms of whether we were immediately on board or whether we wanted to do a bit of research first. So when I first heard the concept, I didn't even know that it was possible. I had no idea that some crazy people decided to row across oceans. It just seemed literally unfathomable to me. So I did do a little bit of research. I read a few autobiographies, I watched the documentaries that were available, and just the more that I learned about it, the more I had this sort of overwhelming desire to be involved. But we were all very positive from quite early on about the idea. It was only when we started to have to fork over registration fees and stuff like that a couple of months later that it dawned on us that we were actually fully committed to this endeavour.
And what was it that the 4 of you, was it natural fit, Cam, with the 3 other boys, and you went, yep, they've got the work ethic, the commitment, and more importantly, we're going to be able to get on with each other as a solid unit for the 2 years and then the 35 days at sea?
I think in terms of everyone's commitment, we knew each other well enough to be able to say these are going to be guys that you could spend a lot of time with and some sort of tough times and adversity with. But we could never have really known at the outset what we were going to go through. So we made a very conscious plan, particularly over kind of those first few months, to get ourselves in really uncomfortable environments test those sort of relationships and friendships and see how we all responded under that kind of pressure that we would ultimately be under. And as we sort of, progressed through some of those things that we took on early doors, we started to get a better understanding of how solid we could be as a unit. And once that sort of firmed up, we knew that we'd be okay. But we also talked about contingency plans, and some of us were in the process of sort of having kids, and we didn't know, if it would continue to be 100% feasible. But we quickly learned as soon as we reached out to other people within our network to find backups that no one else was willing to put their hand up.
Yeah, sure. And with the training, I assume that the very nature of it is you get yourself a rowing machine and you can build up the fitness, on your own. But when did you start coming together, getting out on the water as a group and building the team cohesiveness that needs to exist beyond just sitting rowing next to each other?
We tried to do what we could from the very start to always replicate a team environment. So all those big training sessions, even if it wasn't there, we made sure that we did them together wherever possible. We also, having all agreed to sign up to do this row across the Atlantic, we realised fairly early on that we would have to learn to row at some point. So we signed up to a local rowing club, and we could do that without necessarily having the ocean rowing boat. And we just learnt flat water rowing in a four-man scull. So that was it's actually quite a lot harder than I had anticipated. So the kind of tension through learning that together as four newcomers to the sport, that was quite a good team building activity as well. And then there's no replacement for being able to get out on the ocean in the boat. So about a year into our process of going through training and trying to replicate the environment as much as possible, we managed to get the ocean rowing boat over to Australia. Then once we could take that outside the heads and do 24, 48-hour practice rows, that really gave us a taste for what we'd be in for, and helped continue to develop the team dynamic as well.
And the boat that you got out here to do the training, was that the one that you'd eventually race in?
Yeah, exactly. So they're a pretty niche asset, so there's not a lot floating around. So what we had to do was we had to engage a prior team who'd done the race in the previous year, and then buy their boat secondhand, and then get that boat shipped via Antigua back to the UK, have a bunch of safety checks on it, then get it shipped to Australia. So quite a timely and sort of costly process. But we said from the start, we had very clear sort of goals and objectives as a team that we aligned on. And we said from the start, getting the boat in Australia to do as much training on it as we possibly could was one of our highest possible priorities.
Yeah, of course. And how long prior to the start of the race in December, how long prior did you get the boat over there and then get yourselves over there ready for the start in the Canary Islands?
So we shipped our boat from Australia in about September, and then we went over as per kind of the race regulations. It had to be there 10 days before the start, and carrying on the theme of sort of everything that could go wrong going wrong in the lead up to the event. Qantas just literally out of the blue cancelled our flight, Sydney to London, about between 12 and 24 hours before the flight, and we were already cutting it pretty fine to get there in time. So we were sort of racing around trying to find alternate flights, and ended up being able to get something via Japan, and then getting a BA flight, and we sort of just got there in time for that 10-day cutoff, which is when they've got to do a bunch of all the safety checks and near checks and things like that in terms of the stuff for port clearance as well.
And Cam, you must have been thinking with all of those issues, and then right up with the technical issue prior to start, you must have been thinking, just let us get on the water.
Yeah, that's exactly what we were thinking. And there's just so much administrative preparation that goes into something like this. It's the reason it takes a couple of years to prepare isn't because it takes a long time to get fit to row an ocean. It's because of that admin side and the preparation and logistics planning involved, and it does sort of, you know, grind you down over time. And to be able to say, look, let's just forget about that and focus on rowing was actually a massively relieving prospect for us.
It's not unlike so many challenges and different people that we've spoken to, and even hosting the bike rides in Thailand. The easiest part, and this might be a simplification of what you went through, but we'll hear about that in a minute. The easiest part, or you just go, just let me do what I'm here to do, either ride, run, or row. You know, just get rid of the rest of the stuff that sometimes is out of your control, and just let me do what we've trained to do. So, Cam, on that note, for those that might not have seen the video, they don't have a mental picture of what this looks like, this vessel that you're spending, you know, 35 days in. Can you paint a picture with the, you know, your sleeping quarters? You got 2 rowing at any one time, and talk us through what the physical setup of the boat looks like, so that those that haven't seen it can get an understanding of what we're talking about here.
Yeah, I appreciate that it's definitely an abstract kind of concept for most people. One way that we often describe it is, I mean, it is a 7-metre, roughly, ocean rowing boat, similar to the kind of dimensions of a regular rowing boat, but with a stern and bow cabin that you can sort of just squeeze an average sized person into at the best of times. But then we've also got to be fully self-sufficient. That means that we need all our food and capability to make water for the full duration of the crossing, and they actually stipulate that you require 60 days worth as a safety measure. So we've got all our gear, all our food, everything sort of stored away under the boat and in every possible nook and cranny. And then there's actually 3 rowing positions which are completely exposed to the elements. There's no sort of like roof or anything like that on the rowing boat. And the sort of tried and tested formula for success is that you row in patterns of 2 rowers on, 2 rowers off, if you're a 4 like we were, and you row in 2-hour shifts, and then you have a 2-hour break where you're off the oars, and that is 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for as long as it takes. And in that 2-hour shift off the oars, that doesn't mean you get to rest for 2 hours. There's sort of plenty of other things that you need to do. You need to fuel your body with a lot of calories, so sort of averaging about 6,000 calories per person per day, which means a lot of time taken to eat those in your breaks. There's boat maintenance, ongoing boat maintenance that you have to do. There's navigation sort of process that you're constantly going through as well, and checking and rechecking. And then you might be able to get, there's also body maintenance as well, because your body really starts to fall off a cliff when you're exposed to the elements and a lot of sun and salt from the seawater over time. And then you might get to have a little bit of a rest as well. So you're in a very tight, confined space. You don't really ever stand up for the whole time, because the motion of the waves mean that it's quite unstable and unsafe. So you're sort of just hovering and crawling around a lot. It's a lot like, we describe it to some friends, a lot like sitting on your couch at home for, 35 days with 3 of your mates, and you're not allowed to leave the couch for the entire time, except you're also in waves as big as the house.
Yeah, that's a pretty cool metaphor. So with the water, you're obviously running some type of desalination process, is that correct?
Yeah, so that's the most important bit of kit really on the whole boat, because you can certainly survive for a few days if something happened to your food source or whatever else, but the fresh water is absolutely critical, and that's through a desalination unit that we've got on board. It worked pretty well for us. We did have a couple issues, but there's basically a factory reset that you manually do if it stops working or it's not sort of converting the water properly. So we had a few scares, but on the whole, that worked for us quite well.
Yeah, cool. And there's a couple of support or safety vehicles that or yachts that are within the flotilla, so to speak, that are there from a safety perspective, but it's not something that you can call on to assist. And I am assuming here that if you do, well, then you're out of the race.
Yeah, so the way that they run it is there's basically one, what they call a safety yacht. It's not going to be there to, rescue you if you're in an emergency situation, just because it's never going to be close enough. But it's more there to help with, if you've got some sort of technical issue, you could give them a call on the sat phone and say, oh, I've got this problem with the water maker. Can you help walk me through, how I can resolve it? Because in our instance, we were never within 1,000 kilometres or maybe even 2,000 kilometres of the safety yacht. So if we called them and said, oh, guys, we're in a bit of trouble, can you help us out? They'd say, yeah, we'll make a course directly for you and we'll see you in 6 days.
Yeah. Long time to tread water, hey?
Yeah. So what does happen if you are in a genuine emergency is that we have an e-curb on board, which you would deploy, and then the sort of maritime convention is that the nearest vessel is obligated to come to your aid unless it puts that vessel itself in harm's way, and sort of on average, based on the level of traffic within the Atlantic, and it's a big ocean, you might be sort of 1 to 2 days away from the nearest vessel at given points in time. So someone's going to get there within maybe a day or so, but it's probably not going to be that support yacht.
Yeah, sure. And you spoke about 2 hours on, 2 hours off with the 4-man crew and you spoke about all of the things that you had to take care of when you weren't paddling. You spoke about body maintenance, and I have this picture, knowing you, Cam, that you were then shaving down and taking care of the physical appearance, but it's actually more around your health, yeah?
Yeah, no, there was no blow dryers or, beard trimmers on board. Unfortunately, it was only the essentials. That's, actually, to be honest, this cycle, because I've never really cycled before, doing this sort of couple 100 kilometres a week cycling is actually, it's giving me a slight recollection of the pain in the backside that we often experience. So we definitely need to take care of our bodies, because even the smallest issue could really significantly deteriorate if it wasn't attended to, and that's when you sort of get in real trouble. So things like salt sores that you get from the exposure to the salt, and the friction and rubbing on your body can open up and get infected, and that sort of thing. And we had to wipe ourselves down after every single shift before we'd go back in the cabin, because of the sort of body maintenance side of things, but also the cabin maintenance side of things as well, to make sure that the living space that we were, if you could generously call it that, where we were sleeping, remained as hygienic as possible also.
Yeah, so you didn't want to be taking the salt and so forth into the queen bed and the lounge room that you had set up at the front of the cabin, yeah?
Exactly, yeah. You could have had a problem with the flat screen TV or something like that.
So how much out of the 24-hour period, like I'm assuming, took a couple of days to settle into just a couple of days to settle into the rhythm and routine, 5 days in or so forth, what we averaging from a sleep period over at 24 hours?
I'd say it really depended on the days, and some days it would just be so hot or so rough that it would be almost impossible to sleep at all during the day, even if you had a bit of spare time up your sleeve. So, I mean, we never once would you have got asleep for more in the 35 days than more than an hour and 40. during one of the night shifts might be the best that you would ever, if literally your head was down the whole time that you had, you could have got an hour 40, maybe an hour and a half, and 3 lots of that over the night. So you're probably getting sort of 4.5 hours sleep within a 24-hour cycle that you could bank, that you could be pretty confident on. And then if you got any sleep during the day, that'd just be a bit of cream on top.
Yeah. So, mate, there's obviously, and as you talk about with the, really taking care of yourself, and you see similar things in the Tour de France. We've got Mike Tomalaris, who's interviewing a lot of the guests in the morning, and that's a 3-week epic, adventure. And some of the reasons I recall a couple of years ago, one of the cyclists had to pull out of Tour de France from saddle sores. And you go, it's just that some things you can plan for and some things you can't, and just have to learn to adapt and deal with everything that comes up before you. And I'm sure that there was massive learnings out of that for you. There was an occasion when the boat was flipped and you found yourselves upside down, is that right?
Yeah, so we had, by sort of all accounts, we had a pretty rough start to the race, and the first few days were quite hairy in terms of the sea conditions, but then it largely sort of tapered off and was reasonably good conditions for the vast majority of the crossing. And I say sort of good in the sense that they were relatively manageable when you were on the boat, in terms of that there wasn't sort of raging seas. But ironically, having a completely flat day with a very slight crushing headwind is the worst possible situation you can be in terms of how hard you need to work to move the boat, and the sort of toll that's taking on your body. But we didn't see the wrath of the ocean, I sort of put it that way, for really the first 5 out of the 6 weeks. And then the last sort of 6 days or so were just a completely different beast. We got hit with the worst storm system that they've ever had for the crossing. We later found out that all the large cruise vessels in that part of the Atlantic had all received instructions to take safe harbour and come back into Antigua or whatever the closest islands were. And it was just non-stop, relentless, sort of 12 metre waves, 70 km/h winds. The boat was, on the precipice of capsizing for almost that entire time. But it is a very effective vessel at maintaining its kind of buoyancy in the water and manoeuvring around big following conditions. So whilst we were, a little bit sort of frightened about what could happen, we started to get a lot more trust in the boat. And then with about roughly 4 or 5 days to go, I was on the oars in the bow position, and it was 4 a.m. It was pretty much pitch black. Any sort of sliver of moon was behind the clouds. And just before a changeover, I just saw a huge, huge wall of water to my left-hand side, and it was a rogue wave that was going to hit us from the beam, and that's where the boat is sort of the least stable in that position. And it just shot me straight out of the boat, straight into the ocean, because I was tethered on. Obviously, that tether's just gone taut, and I didn't go sort of too deep. Fletcher was on the stern seat. It hadn't surfaced yet. I saw a couple of things that had been ripped out of the boat, even though they'd been tethered on. Some stuff that we really kind of needed floating off into the distance. Unfortunately, eventually the boat did self-right, which it's designed to do. We had sort of about an hour or two where we tried to recollect ourselves, and then we just sort of got on with it.
And how many days prior to the finish was that, Cam?
I think it could have been maybe 4 or 5 days before the end. So we really, really got tested in the last week. It was a huge magnitude times more difficult than everything that we'd encountered up until that point.
And surviving that, it's a holy shit type of moment, and incredibly frightening. And I can feel the chills on me as you talk about it. was that something that as a team and as an individual that you went, you came out of it and went, we've survived that, we're good, we'll make this, and it almost lifted the spirits? Or was it a holy shit, I don't know if we can survive another one?
It was definitely a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B. So I think that in the moment, I was really proud of the boys in terms of how everyone responded in that actual moment of panic when, if someone wasn't properly tethered in or the tether had come off, there is literally 0% chance of that person ever being found. So they would absolutely be lost at sea. So it was a, high consequence sort of dramatic event, but everyone was super composed, checked the safety of everyone else on the boat was sort of paramount. Once everyone was accounted for, it was getting the boat back into a safe position so that we didn't have another capsize with the subsequent wave. And then we sort of got going, and it was all kind of adrenaline at that point. And then it's not until you go back in for your off shift a couple hours later that you can sort of actually play over in your mind what happened and what the sort of consequences could have been. But in reality, we survived it and we were totally fine. And that did give us more confidence in those weather conditions. And it meant that we could push the boat a little harder, knowing that the worst thing that could happen would be just that we capsized and have to turn the boat back over again. So in some ways it did instill us with a little bit more confidence. But yeah, we continued to take a battering for the next 4 days. So it certainly wasn't enjoyable.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Ryan is quoted as saying is that the final few days were so tough. He said that you were broken and exhausted. How much of it was that related to the ordeal of the boat tip over? How much of that was just a cumulative build-up of what you were doing? And how much of it was there was some recognition that you were getting close, and therefore the need to be strong and paddle for another 20 days was gone, and that you were mentally and physically going, we're getting close now? What are your thoughts?
I think that no matter what the undertaking, there is always a sort of significant psychological element of kind of being able to just put your head down and get through things until you get very close to the finish line. And then your sort of perspective does shift a little bit. And I think that invariably you do sort of feel it being a lot tougher in the sort of final stages of any challenge. So I completely agree with you on that point that would have been a factor. But for us, just like objectively, that the ocean was 10 times worse than what we experienced at its worst during those last 4 days. And the thing about being out there in the ocean in those conditions is it's not just that, it's sort of sketchy and it's hard to maneuver the boat and the boat's all over the place and at risk of capsize. It's the impact physically on your body. So because that we had such major conditions and swell and, storms and that sort of thing in those last few days, never once were our bodies able to dry, and our cabins just got completely soaked because as you have to do the changeover, even if you're doing everything you can to keep the cabin as secure as possible, waves are just coming in, rain's coming in, and if you can't get your body physically dry, just everything gets a lot worse. So our bottoms went from being relatively unimpacted due to our hygiene regimen to being in a really ghastly state. The salt water was sort of almost like sort of stinging and eroding part of our faces at one point in time, with the really heavy wind as well. It's sort of 70, 80 kilometers an hour wind, and it was just terrible.
Yeah. It's unless you've been there, you just can't truly appreciate it. And it's an interesting thing you say around getting towards the end and completely different, but we see it on our bike rides, whether it's a 5-day ride and people at the end of day 3 or 4, they're tired and thinking, I've only got 2 days to go. On our 8-day bike ride, it's day 6, it's that 3/4 mark where they struggle. those that are doing the 1600, 16 days, you know, there'll be that day of 12, 13 or so forth where, you know, what was exciting becomes routine. But I think that, you know, there's obviously a real lesson in being able to push through those challenging times when the energy's low. And as a team, I'm assuming that that was one of the real strengths in you, is that you were there supporting and holding the space for one another.
Yeah, that was a huge part. I think of why we did reasonably well, but it was also quite a revelation for me personally. Is just sort of, you know, when you're down in a real low, and you sort of think that, you know, it can't get much worse. It just gets better over time. So yeah, we had periods where, you know, the back pain was so immense in that first week that you'd think I almost can't go on. And then fast forward to the second weekend, I didn't even have any pain in my back. Or in the first sort of 5-6 days, I was having really significant hallucinations at night, was falling asleep while rowing and just thinking, how am I ever going to be able to get through this sort of fatigue? And then a couple of days later, even though we were operating on 4 or 5 hours sleep a day, we were actually, you know, I've got a young baby, and I was significantly more awake and alert there than I am half the time now. So there definitely is a barrier that if you can kind of push through, then you're almost always going to come good on the other side. And the body is incredibly adaptable in that sense. So that was a big thing. And then we also, as a team, kind of we're trying to be as acutely aware as possible on how the other guys are going, because invariably you're going to be at different stages at different times, and you just want to sort of, you know, if you can support someone, or you can offer to maybe do their washing for them or something like that on the boat, it just makes their life a bit easier when you can see that they're doing it tough. That always sort of ends up paying dividends, not only for them, but then sort of for you when they reciprocate that down the track.
Cam, I think some of what you just said is just real gold for so many of us on the call. Is that, you know, there's not many that would have the ability or desire or resourcefulness to undertake what you've done, but we all face challenges of our own, whether it's personal, professional, on the sporting field. And we had Lucy Bartholomew yesterday, an ultra trail runner, and she talked about this one particular run that she was doing. And it wasn't until the 50K mark that she found a mojo. And it was just a case of, you know, just continuing to push. And something that's coming out in these interviews with these elite athletes such as yourself is that, you know, I'm forming the opinion that's, you know, you get to a point where you're physically strong, but then the real strength comes in the mental strength that you have to continue.
Yeah, I think that reservoir is what you have to ultimately depend on, because you never know what's going to happen physically with your body on any given day. But when you sort of think that you've gone as far as you can, invariably there is almost always either another gear, or you just have to delay sort of giving up for as long as possible and give your body physically the time to sort of manifest the necessary adaptations so that it'll get you out of trouble. And I think that that's definitely something that we experience. And part of that challenge at the very end is that you start to mentally override that, because you're so close to the culmination that you sort of lose the ability at times to focus entirely in the moment. And that's where, you know, that the last couple of days or the last couple of Ks or whatever it is in your given experience can just seem like you're going through hell.
Yeah. And, you know, we get to the top of this temple here that the riders are on, and it's a short but bloody steep climb up to this temple. And one of the highlights for me riding up this is seeing the commitment and the success of those who get to the top. Some will ride it, some will find that they need to get off and push, but no one's ever been left down the bottom. Everyone makes it to the top. And again, it comes down to that strength and courage and going beyond what might have been self-imposed limitations. Cam, I want to ask you, different people have different things to give themselves a lift, raise the spirits. What was it for you guys? Was it a particular food? Was it a mantra that you had? Was it, some type of drink? What was it that was a celebration and something that you could go to lift your spirits?
What we try to do, because of the kind of magnitude of what we were taking on, you're just out in the open ocean for the entire time with no sort of physical milestone or landmarks that you can look to or anything like that. So we had to, I guess, find ways ourselves of chunking down the magnitude of the challenge to something that felt much more tangible. So we would try to make a bit of fun out of it. We would have daily milestones. We'd have sort of setting based on, how many kilometers we were going to get in a day or what the wind speeds would be on a given day or whatever else. And then we kind of had reward mechanisms built into that. So if as a team we hit a certain milestone, then we'd crack out some of the lollies or chocolates that we had on board. The person who was the closest to getting a certain thing would be able to ask the person who was the least try to do a task for them that day. And we just tried to have little things that we could do as a team that kind of kept us on point. And then I guess personally, we probably had the stuff that we were using to motivate us personally as well, which might have all been a little bit different. I did have a little bit of a mantra if I went to a very dark place that I'd just sort of repeat just to take my mind off what we were doing. But then we also had, our friends, family, loved ones that were all watching and following us and seeing how we were tracking, and that was a motivation, as well as the fundraising for the charity, the Black Dog Institute, and the guys all there that we knew were behind us and supporting us. So there was plenty of things that you could sort of reflect on to give yourself a bit of motivation if you were down in the dumps.
Yeah, cool. Hey, Cam, we're coming to the end, and there's a couple of questions that I wanted to ask you. I can't help but think that your perspective now on courage, commitment, resilience, achievement, pushing through all of that has changed forever because of what you've been exposed to and what you've achieved. How do you ensure that you're not holding those around you, either in a business sense as a corporate leader that you are, or just within family or community, that that you're not holding people to the same type of levels that you've now gone to because of what you've achieved?
Well, I guess one thing that sort of came to my mind when you were asking the question was that on paper, it's a pretty incredible thing to have done the row across the Atlantic. But the reality is, and after having been through it, is that I genuinely think that anyone could do it. So I guess I try to reframe whenever I'm, having a conversation about what we've done, to the fact that, it's the kind of thing that really anyone could do. But you just have to think in that way of things that we've spoken to about, sort of chunking things down into small, manageable milestones, appreciating that at times, yourself or people within your team are going to be uncomfortable, are going to be upset, and not holding them to account that they're always going to be at 100%, but just knowing that if you sort of keep your head down, then eventually you can move through that and come out on the other end and be in that sort of positive high performance place. So I definitely, I don't think that I've accomplished anything particularly amazing that other people couldn't do. So in one sense, I find it hard to think about it in that way.
Yeah, cool, mate. I think other people might think differently. We've gone over time. 2 really quick questions. Did you suffer from the post-ride blues? Did you miss the boat? Did you miss your mates? Did you miss being on the water? And if so, how long did that go for? And then finally, just let us know how people can get in touch with you if they would love to have you come and share that story for their team at a conference, a dinner, conversation, and so forth.
So I can answer the first one very quickly. I didn't miss any of it at all. I was
yeah, right.
couldn't have been more happy for it to be over. But what I have found is that certain components of the experience are things that I realised that I really value and treasure, and that's things like spending time in nature with close friends. But that's something that I can easily replicate with a more easily substitutable challenge, such as going for a cycle up at West Head or going for a bushwalk in the park. So I sort of can find ways to still tap into that experience that I really valued. And then in terms of means of getting in touch, I'm not sure if any of my email or contact details are shared, but I'm happy to have a chat with anyone if they're interested in doing a bit of the story or doing the challenge themselves.
Yeah, cool, mate. We'll post that on the Facebook page for all of those that are here that have heard this today or listening to a recording. Thanks, mate. I'll hand back to CT. Really good to catch up. Loved your story. Could have spoken to you for another hour without a problem.
Great to chat, Pete. Take it easy.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Pete and Cam. What an amazing story. Thank you for giving up your time today to clock up some Ks, but also share that incredible story. So team, we're just, we're at the end of another session. So another 25 kilometers logged. So don't forget to jump over to My Virtual Mission. I think we're all we've all got a good process going now. So you probably don't need my daily reminders there anymore. Jumping on tomorrow, we've got another couple of amazing guests, and they just keep coming. We've got close to, I'd say, about 70% of these sessions filled with just some of the most inspiring people that I've heard of, and tomorrow's going to be no different. We're joined by Greg Wallace at lunchtime. So Greg actually ran the 800-kilometre Thailand ride back in 2018. So he's going to come on and share his story. And then we've also got tomorrow morning, so 7 a.m. tomorrow, we've got Aidan Grimes, who he's another phenomenal guy. He has walked Kokoda track 124 times. So he has got some incredible stories about his time on the track and just what he's learnt through the people and that he's met along the way. So to more amazing humans coming up. Thank you again, Cam, for today. Good luck with the rest of the 800-kilometre challenge. We are so glad that you're on that journey with us.
Thanks a lot.
No worries. So thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of the day.